The storm came without warning, swallowing the Cessna whole. One moment Jake Mercer could see the jagged peaks of the Brooks Range cutting through twilight. The next, nothing but white chaos. The engine coughed, sputtered, died. In the sudden silence broken only by howling wind, he had 3 seconds to find a place that wouldn't kill them all. What he couldn't know, what none of them could know, was that the crash wasn't an accident, and what waited in the snow below would force him to become the weapon he'd spent 14 months trying to bury. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if you want to support the channel, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. Northern Alaska in late January is a place where the earth itself seems to have given up on warmth, on mercy, on anything resembling human comfort. The Brooks Range stretches across the top of the world like the spine of some frozen giant, its peaks clawing at a sky that offers barely 3 hours of weak daylight before surrendering again to darkness. The cold here doesn't just bite, it inhabits, working its way through layers of clothing and flesh until it settles in the bone, a constant companion, whispering that this land was never meant for human habitation. The wind carries voices, or seems to. The howls and shrieks of air force through narrow valleys, creating sounds that make even experienced pilots grip their controls a little tighter. Snow doesn't fall so much as materialize, transforming visibility from 10 miles to 10 feet in heartbeats, turning the familiar into the alien, the navigable into the lethal. Coldfoot, if you could call 10 permanent residents a town, crouched in a valley 40 miles south. A handful of structures clinging to existence along the Dalton Highway, like barnacles on a ship that refused to sink. Beyond that, nothing but wilderness, so vast and indifferent that a person could vanish into it and leave no more trace than a snowflake on a glacier. Jake Mercer sat in the pilot's seat of the Cessna 208 Caravan, his ice-blue eyes scanning instruments with the methodical attention of someone who'd learned long ago that complacency killed faster than enemy fire. 34 years old, 6'2", with the kind of lean, coil build that came from years of carrying heavy loads over hostile terrain. His face was weathered beyond his years, close-cropped dark hair already showing gray at the temples, and a 3-inch scar along his left jaw, a gift from Kandahar, along with the nightmares and the ghosts of 3 teammates who hadn't made it home. His hands on the controls moved with economy of motion, no wasted movement, every adjustment precise and minimal. He wore practical layers, thermal base, fleece mid, weather-resistant shell, all in muted grays and blacks. Nothing bright, nothing that drew attention. The watchful eyes that had kept him alive through 8 years as a Navy SEAL now tracked weather patterns and fuel consumption with the same intensity they'd once tracked enemy positions. This was supposed to be simple. Fly supplies to Dr. Voss's research station, collect payment, return before dark. Extra money for gear, for the satellite internet that kept him connected to the few people he still talked to. For the life of careful isolation he built in a cabin 30 miles from the nearest human. Simple, clean, no complications. In the cargo area behind him, Titan lay in his secured crate, 95 pounds of dark sable German Shepherd, amber eyes alert despite the engine vibration. 5 years old, East German working line, with a white chest patch shaped like a lightning bolt, and a small notch in his left ear where shrapnel had come too close in Helmand Province. Titan wasn't a pet. He was a partner, a brother, a weapon with fur and loyalty so absolute it sometimes made Jake's chest tight with an emotion he didn't want to name. The dog had saved his life twice in combat, and Jake had carried him 4 miles through enemy territory when Titan took a bullet meant for him. They'd both been retired, medically discharged, given certificates and handshakes, and sent back to a world that didn't understand what they'd seen, what they'd done, what they'd lost. The third passenger, Sarah Chen, sat in the rear seat, 29 years old, 5'4", with short black hair and wireframe glasses constantly fogging in the temperature differential. She worked for the Anchorage Daily News, an investigative journalist who'd paid extra for the flight, citing a story about climate research, but asking too many questions about mining activity and accident rates. Jake had learned not to get involved in other people's missions. He flew the plane. That was all. The turbulence hit like a fist. The Cessna dropped, Jake's stomach lurching as he fought the controls, years of training overriding the spike of adrenaline. Beside him, Sarah gasped, gripping the seat. In the back, Titan remained silent, trusting, waiting. Then the engine coughed. Jake's eyes snapped to the fuel gauge, the temperature readings, the oil pressure. Everything read normal. Everything except the sound, that irregular stuttering that meant something fundamental had gone wrong. "What's happening?" Sarah's voice carried the edge of controlled panic. "Engine trouble. Secure everything." Jake's voice remained flat, calm. His hands already working through emergency procedures, trying to coax life back into the dying turbine. The altimeter unwound. 3,000 feet. 2,500. The world outside was pure white now. The storm materializing around them like they'd flown into a cloud of static. Visibility 0. The GPS showing terrain rising fast. 2,000 feet. The engine quit entirely. In the sudden horrible silence, broken only by wind shrieking past the fuselage and the higher-pitched whistle of air over dead props, Jake Mercer stopped being a civilian pilot and became what he'd been trained to be. A warrior making life-or-death decisions with incomplete information and no time for doubt. "Brace," he said. One word, absolute authority. And brought the Cessna's nose up into a glide path that would either save them or kill them in the next 30 seconds. The Cessna hit hard, belly first into a snowbank that compressed and exploded around them like a detonation of white. The impact threw Jake forward against his harness, ribs screaming, the world spinning in shrieking metal, and then stillness. Absolute stillness, except for wind howling outside and his own breathing harsh in his ears. He moved immediately, training overriding pain, hands checking his body for serious damage, finding bruises but nothing broken, then twisting to check Sarah. She hung in her harness, face pale, left arm cradled against her chest at an angle that made his stomach sink. Conscious, breathing. Her glasses hung from one ear, cracked lens catching the dim emergency lighting. "Don't move that arm," he said. Already releasing his harness, the pilot's door jammed, forcing him to kick it 3 times before it shrieked open into the storm. The cold hit like immersion in ice water, stealing breath, burning exposed skin. 40 below. Maybe worse with wind chill. They had minutes, not hours. Titan was already out of his crate when Jake reached the cargo area. The dog's training keeping him stationary despite the crash, waiting for commands. Jake ran hands over him quickly, checking for injury, finding nothing serious. "Good boy. With me." He switched to hand signals, 2 fingers down, then forward. Titan moved to the exit, body low, already scanning their surroundings despite the whiteout. Jake helped Sarah out, supporting her weight, the journalist biting back whimpers as movement jostled her arm. Fracture, definitely. He pulled emergency supplies from the cargo area. 2 packs, medical kit, emergency beacon. His hands found the beacon, triggered it, watched for the indicator light. Nothing. He checked connections, battery, trigger again, dead. Either damaged in the crash or, the thought tried to form but he pushed it away. Deal with immediate problems first. "Can you walk?" he asked Sarah. She nodded, jaw tight. "How far?" "Don't know yet. Stay close." He shouldered both packs, kept one hand on Sarah's good arm, and started moving. The wind tried to push them back, snow already covering the Cessna's outline. No visibility beyond 10 feet. The world reduced to swirling white and the ground beneath their boots. Titan ranged ahead, never more than a few yards distant, his dark form appearing and disappearing in the storm like a ghost. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably 40 minutes, Jake navigating by compass and terrain slope, keeping them moving downhill toward where trees might offer shelter. Sarah stumbled frequently, her breathing ragged, shock setting in despite the cold's numbing mercy. Titan stopped suddenly, body rigid, ears forward. Jake froze, hand instinctively moving toward the sidearm he wore under his jacket. Old habits, even in civilian life. But Titan's posture wasn't threat alertness. This was discovery. The dog moved forward, disappeared into the white. Then his bark carried back, muffled by snow but insistent. "Come on." Jake guided Sarah forward, following Titan's tracks, and then structure materialized out of the storm. A cabin, small, weathered logs dark against the snow, chimney intact, windows shuttered. Jake approached carefully, tried the door, unlocked, pushed it open into darkness that felt warm by comparison to the screaming cold outside. Titan, clear. The dog entered first. Jake waiting, listening. Titan's bark came back, different tone, not clear. Found something. Jake guided Sarah inside, closed the door against the wind, pulled a flashlight from his pack. The beam cut through darkness, revealing a single room, wood stove, cot, table, shelves with supplies, and in the corner, pressed against the wall behind the stove, a child. A boy, maybe 12 years old, small for his age, with dark hair and darker eyes wide with terror, wrapped in blankets that couldn't hide his shivering, inupiate features, frostbite damage visible on his fingertips, and an expression Jake had seen before on children in war zones, the look of someone who'd learned that adults brought danger, not safety. Titan approached slowly, non-threatening, and the boy's expression changed fractionally. He reached out one damaged hand toward the dog. Titan sat, allowed the touch, his tail moving slightly. "It's okay," Jake said, voice low, non-threatening, keeping the flashlight pointed down. "We're not going to hurt you. Our plane crashed. We need shelter. Are you hurt?" The boy stared at him, then at Sarah, then back. Back to Titan. When he spoke, his voice came out rough, unused. "You're not with them." "With who?" "The men, the ones looking." The boy's shivering intensified. "They killed my parents. They're looking for me. They know I have." He stopped, eyes darting to a corner of the cabin where floorboards looked disturbed. Jake's mind shifted into tactical assessment, the pieces aligning in ways he didn't like. Remote location. Child hiding. Someone searching. His question came out harder than intended. "Who killed your parents?" "The company men. My dad, he guided for researchers. He found something he wasn't supposed to see. Documents. They made it look like an accident, plane crash in the mountains. But I heard them talking before. I heard them planning it." The words tumbled out faster now, months of isolation and terror breaking through. "Dad hid the papers before they came. Told me if anything happened, take them to the FBI. Not the sheriff, not anyone local. He said the sheriff takes money from them." Sarah had lowered herself onto the cot, cradling her arm, but her eyes were sharp behind the broken glasses. "What company?" "Boreal. Boreal Extraction." The boy pronounced it carefully, like he'd memorized it. "The man in charge, Holloway. He wants the land where the wolf lady does her research. Dad's papers prove he's lying about permits, about surveys, about everything." Jake felt the familiar weight settling onto his shoulders, the one he'd tried to leave behind when he'd left the teams. Not his fight, not his town, not his problem. He'd come to Alaska specifically to avoid situations exactly like this. To exist in careful isolation where the only person he was responsible for was himself, and the only life that depended on him was Titan's. But the boy was looking at him with eyes that had seen too much, and Sarah was injured and depending on him. And somewhere out there in the storm, men were searching, and a woman at a research station 40 miles north had no idea she was in danger. "What's your name?" Jake asked. Tommy Kavik." "I'm Jake. This is Sarah, and that's Titan." He moved to the stove, started building a fire from the cabin's supply of wood, hands working automatically. "How long have you been here?" 3 days. I got away from my aunt's house in Coldfoot when I heard them asking about me, asking if my dad left anything with me. This was Dad's hunting cabin. Nobody knows about it except family." Tommy paused. "How long until they find the plane?" "If they're looking, not long. Storm will slow them, but not stop them." Jake got the fire lit, began assessing their supplies. Enough food for a few days, if rationed. Water from melting snow. Medical supplies limited. The cabin was defensible from a tactical standpoint. Single entrance, shuttered windows. But indefensible strategically. No communication, no reinforcements, no exit if they were surrounded. Tommy moved to the disturbed floorboards, pried up 3 of them with the familiarity of repeated practice, and pulled out a waterproof document bag. "Dad died for these." Jake took the bag, opened it. Inside, geological surveys, emails printed on paper, photographs of men exchanging envelopes. Legal documents with forged signatures. Enough evidence to destroy careers, end a corporation, put people in federal prison for decades. And a list of 14 names with dates beside them. Deaths ruled accidental over 18 months. The most recent was 6 months ago. James and Carol Kavik, Plane crash. Brooks Range. Sarah stood despite her pain, looking over his shoulder. This is it. This is what I've been investigating. This is proof. This is a death warrant. Jake corrected. For everyone who knows it exists. He looked at Tommy. Where's this research station? 40 miles north. Dr. Voss, she studies wolves. She's been there 2 years. Dad said her research proves the land is protected habitat, that Holloway can't mine there legally. That's why she's on the list too. Jake closed his eyes briefly. 40 miles through Arctic wilderness, in a storm, with an injured journalist and a traumatized child. Being hunted by people willing to commit murder to protect a fortune in rare earth minerals. Every tactical instinct said hole up, wait for rescue, let authorities handle it. But rescue wasn't coming, not with a sabotaged beacon and communications that now seemed suspiciously failed. And if Dr. Voss was on that list, she was walking into a trap the moment she left her station. Outside, Titan growled low, the sound that meant he detected something distant but approaching. Vehicle engines, maybe, or snowmobiles. The storm would muffle sound, but Titan's hearing operated on a different level than human perception. Jake made the decision in the space between heartbeats. Tommy, show me everything about this cabin's surroundings. Sarah, I'm setting that arm. Going to hurt. Titan guard. The dog moved to the door, body tense, ears tracking sounds beyond human range. They'd picked the wrong person to terrorize, and the wrong dog to try hunting in a storm. But they didn't know that yet. They would. Setting Sarah's arm took 15 minutes of careful manipulation while she bit down on leather, and Tommy held the flashlight with shaking hands. Jake had done this before, in worse conditions, with people more seriously injured. The bone alignment felt clean, the fracture simple rather than compound. He splinted it with branches from the woodpile and medical tape from his kit, then fashioned a sling from spare clothing. Sarah's face was gray with pain, but she nodded when he asked if she could function. I've worked through worse, she said, voice tight. Just tell me what you need. What he needed was extraction, air support, and a team of operators. What he had was a dog, a journalist with a broken arm, a terrified child, and documents that men had killed for repeatedly. The tactical situation was deteriorating by the hour. Tommy showed him the cabin's layout with the precision of a child who'd spent days studying his environment for threats. One door facing south, 2 windows with intact shutters that could be barred from inside, walls solid enough to stop small arms fire. The surrounding area was sparse pine forest, rolling terrain that provided some cover but not enough to prevent approach. The nearest road was 3 miles east, the crash site roughly 2 miles southwest. If searchers found the plane, they'd expand outward in a grid pattern. This cabin sat directly in that search radius. How many men? Jake asked Tommy. I've seen 8. Big man with no hair, he's the boss of them, Russian accent. They came to Aunt's house asking questions, trying to sound friendly. But I saw guns under their coats. When they left, I heard one tell the other to watch the house, make sure I didn't run. Tommy's voice stayed steady, but his hands betrayed him, trembling as he spoke. I went out the back window that night, been here since. 8 hostiles, professionally armed, likely with cold weather gear and vehicles. Jake mentally cataloged his own resources. 1 sidearm, a Glock 19, with 2 spare magazines, standard civilian carry. His knife, Titan. And the terrain itself, if he could use it correctly. The dog's growl intensified, then cut off at Jake's hand signal. In the new silence, Jake heard what Titan had detected minutes earlier. The distant whine of snowmobile engines, multiple machines, growing closer then fading as they swept search patterns through the storm. They're doing a grid, Sarah said. Professional search and rescue pattern. Search and eliminate, Jake corrected. They find us, they won't ask questions. He moved to the window, cracked the shutter just enough to see out. The storm had lessened slightly, visibility now maybe 30 yards instead of 10. Enough to see the dark shapes of pines bending in wind, the endless white of accumulated snow. And there at the edge of vision, a light. Flashlight or headlamp, bobbing through trees, moving methodically. Jake closed the shutter, turned to face his unlikely team. Sarah, watching him with journalistic assessment. Tommy with desperate hope, Titan with complete trust. The weight of their dependence settled familiar and unwelcome across his shoulders. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll find this place by dawn, if not sooner. We can't outrun them in this weather with injuries, which means we need to change the equation." "How?" Sarah asked. "By going where they don't expect. North, toward the research station. They'll assume we're trying to reach Coldfoot and the highway. We do the opposite. We buy time and warn Dr. Voss." He pulled the topographic map from his pack, spread it on the table. Tommy immediately pointed to locations, confirming the cabin's position, the crash site, the research station's coordinates. "That's 40 miles through the worst terrain in Alaska," Sarah said. "In winter, with a kid and my busted arm. 38 miles if we cut through Frost Valley. 2 days of hard travel, maybe 3 with the storm." Jake traced the route. "There's an old pipeline maintenance shelter here, abandoned but intact. We can hole up for a few hours. The valley's dense forest, harder for vehicles, advantage goes to foot travel. And the men hunting us. We leave a trail they can follow if they want. But following means exposing themselves, stringing out their search line. That's when they stop being the hunters." Jake's voice carried no bravado, just flat assessment. "Titan and I have done this before. Different country. Same principles." Tommy spoke up, quiet but certain. "My dad taught me winter survival. I can keep up. And Dr. Voss, she helped my family when Mom got sick 2 years ago. She drove through a storm to bring medicine. I won't let them kill her too." The simple moral clarity of it hit Jake harder than expected. This child had lost everything and still thought about saving someone else. It was the kind of courage that made Jake's own self-imposed isolation feel like cowardice. Sarah caught his eye, saw something in his expression shift. "You've already decided." "They picked the wrong person to terrorize," Jake said. "And they definitely picked the wrong dog." He began repacking supplies, dividing weight efficiently. Essential cold weather gear, the documents sealed in waterproof bag, medical supplies, minimal food. "We move in 20 minutes. Tommy, you're with me at point. Sarah, you're center. Titan runs rear guard and flanking detection. We travel silent, single file, no talking unless emergency." He pulled Tommy aside, lowered himself to the boy's eye level. "What I'm about to do, what we're about to do, is dangerous. I can't promise we'll all make it, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to get you somewhere safe. Your dad trusted you with those documents. I'm trusting you to keep moving no matter what happens. Understand?" Tommy nodded, then surprised Jake by hugging him quickly, fiercely. "Thank you for not leaving me." Something cracked in Jake's chest, some carefully maintained wall. He returned the embrace briefly, then stood. "Titan, here." The dog moved to his side instantly. Jake knelt, ran his hands through the thick fur, made eye contact. "We're working again, brother. Like old times. Protect the pack. Watch our six." Titan's tail moved once, acknowledgement and readiness. Outside, the snowmobile engines had gone silent. That was worse than hearing them. Silence meant they were searching on foot now, close enough that engine noise might mask sounds of their quarry. Jake killed the fire, scattered the coals, made the cabin look abandoned. He couldn't hide their presence entirely, but he could make it look like they'd left hours ago. At the door, he paused, ran through mental checklist one final time, then pulled the door open into wind and darkness. The forest swallowed them in 3 steps, the cabin disappearing behind curtains of snow. Jake set a brutal pace, using terrain and vegetation to mask their passage, breaking trails so Tommy and Sarah could follow in his footsteps. Titan ranged in patterns, appearing and vanishing, a shadow keeping watch on threats Jake's human senses couldn't detect. They'd covered maybe half a mile when Titan materialized beside Jake, body language screening alert. Jake raised fist, stopping the column. In the silence between wind gusts, voices carried through the trees. Russian accented English, professional communication, multiple speakers. The hunters had found the cabin, which meant in minutes they'd realize their prey had fled, and a chase would begin in earnest. Jake felt the familiar coldness settle into his core, the combat mindset that transformed fear into fuel, uncertainty into clarity. He looked back at Tommy and Sarah, saw exhaustion and pain and determination. Looked at Titan, saw readiness. Then forward into the darkness and storm, toward a woman who didn't know she was marked for death, toward a confrontation that was now inevitable. "Double time," he said quietly. "Stay in my tracks. Don't stop for anything. and they ran into the frozen night, the storm covering their passage, buying them minutes they'd need to survive the hours ahead. They traveled through the night, Jake pushing the pace, until Sarah stumbled and Tommy's breathing came in ragged gasps. Only then did he call halt, in a dense stand of spruce, where branches formed a natural shelter against wind. No fire, too risky. They huddled together for warmth, Titan pressed against Tommy, the dog's body heat helping the boy stop shivering. Jake took first watch, ears straining for sounds of pursuit that never came. Either they'd lost the hunters in the storm, or the professionals were hanging back, waiting for daylight and better conditions. Dawn came reluctantly, the sun a pale suggestion behind clouds that promised more snow. Jake redistributed their supplies, checked Sarah's splint, made Tommy eat protein bars even though the boy said he wasn't hungry. Titan ranged out in widening circles, returning each time with snow clinging to his fur, but no signs of immediate threat. They'd covered maybe 8 miles, still 30 to go. The terrain ahead rose into foothills, more difficult traveling, but better cover. Jake was calculating routes when Titan U-turned and sat directly in front of him, staring with unusual intensity. Not a threat alert, a message. "What is it, boy?" Jake scanned the surrounding forest, saw nothing. Titan turned, looked back the way they'd come, then returned his gaze to Jake. Someone was following but maintaining distance. Professional tracking, staying just outside Titan's threat response range. "We're being followed," Jake said quietly. "They're not engaging, just tracking us, waiting for us to lead them somewhere or for us to make a mistake." "The research station," Sarah said, understanding immediately. "They know we have to warn Dr. Voss. They're letting us lead them right to her." Jake nodded grimly. "Which means we need to change the plan. Tommy, the pipeline shelter you mentioned, how defensible is it?" "One room, metal walls, one door. Dad said it was built to survive storms." Tommy's eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, but his mind stayed sharp. "We make for the shelter, fort up, force them to either bypass us or engage on our terms." Jake began moving again, altering his route slightly, making it obvious they were heading for the shelter. If the hunters wanted a fight, he'd give them one, just not the one they expected. Meanwhile, across 30 miles of wilderness, in a compound that looked more like a fortress than a research station, Marcus Halloway stood in climate-controlled comfort and received news that made his surgically enhanced smile vanish. 52 years old. 6 feet of soft muscle, turning to fat under expensive outdoor gear he'd never actually used. Silver hair perfectly styled even in the Arctic. His pale blue eyes, cold as the landscape outside, fixed on the satellite phone in his hand. "What do you mean the plane went down?" His voice stayed controlled, but the man on the other end, his operations manager in Fairbanks, heard the threat underneath. "Storm took it, went off radar, 30 miles south of the Voss research station. Volkov's team is searching the crash site now." "Were the documents on that plane?" "Unknown." The journalist Chen had been asking questions about accident rets, mining permits. If she connected with the Kavik boy before the crash, then we have a problem. Halloway walked to the window overlooking his command center, a room filled with computers and communications equipment that would have been illegal if anyone knew it existed. "How long until Volkov confirms?" "He estimates 12 hours to complete grid search. Weather's slowing everything. I don't pay him to be slowed by weather. I pay him to eliminate problems." Halloway ended the call, immediately dialed another number. This one rang twice before a voice answered. Heavily accented, completely professional. "Volkov, tell me you have good news, Dmitri." "We found the cabin. Signs of occupancy, recently abandoned. 3 sets of tracks heading north. Adult male, smaller adult, child, and dog prints." Halloway's hand tightened on the phone. "The pilot, the journalist, and the boy." "Appears so. They're moving toward Voss's station, but terrain will slow them significantly. My team can overtake them before they arrive." "No." Halloway's mind worked through scenarios, calculating risks. If they're heading to Voss, they have the documents, which means they think warning her matters. Let them lead you to her. Once they're all together, eliminate everyone and burn the station. Make it look like generator malfunction, tragic accident, bodies too burned for close examination. And if they don't go to the station, if they try to reach the highway, then intercept and eliminate. But Dmitri, understand this. Those documents cannot reach federal authorities. 14 accidents I've paid you very well to arrange. If evidence of those reaches the FBI, neither of us walks away. Holloway's voice dropped to the tone that made employees nervous. The Kavik boy has seen your face. The pilot is a variable I don't like. The journalist has been investigating for months. Dr. Voss has blocked permits that cost me $100 million in delays. This ends today. All of it. Understood. We're moving into position now. The call ended. Holloway stood at the window, looking out at mountains that contained $400 million in rare earth minerals just waiting for extraction. 14 people had stood in his way over 18 months. 14 accidents, carefully arranged, investigation proof. What were 4 more? He'd built this empire through understanding that morality was a luxury for people who couldn't afford his lawyers. In boardrooms from New Haven to D.C., Marcus Holloway was a visionary, a job creator, a captain of industry. Out here, he was simply practical. The land was worth more than the people on it. Basic economics. His satellite phone rang again. The sheriff from Coldfoot, predictable as sunrise. Mr. Holloway, there's been a plane crash. FAA is asking questions about search and rescue coordination. Tell them weather makes SAR impossible for at least 48 hours. By then, there won't be anything to find. He ended the call before the sheriff could respond. The man was bought and paid for, but spineless. Useful for keeping local authorities ignorant, worthless for anything requiring courage. Holloway pulled up surveillance feeds from the Voss research station on his tablet. Dr. Elena Voss, 38, brilliant, stubborn, and completely unaware that she had less than 24 hours to live. Her crime was being competent at her job, documenting wolf populations that proved environmental protections applied to land he'd already sold mineral rights for, illegally, creatively, through shell companies and forged indigenous permissions. She was in her lab, visible through the window, working on something at her computer. Blonde hair in a practical braid, weathered hands moving over keyboard. The kind of person who genuinely believed science and truth mattered more than money. Foolish. Admirable in a useless way, but foolish. His phone buzzed with a message from Volkov. Targets stopped. Pipeline shelter. Requesting permission to engage. Holloway typed back. Negative. Maintain surveillance. Wait until they move or until dark, whichever comes first. Then eliminate with extreme prejudice. No survivors, no evidence. He set the phone down, poured himself bourbon from a crystal decanter that cost more than most Alaskans made in a month, and watched the surveillance feed. Somewhere out in that frozen wasteland, 4 people were trying to be heroes. By tomorrow, they'd be corpses, and the land would be his. Back in the forest, Jake had found the pipeline shelter exactly where Tommy said it would be. A windowless metal box half buried in a hillside, rusted but intact. He cleared the door, checked the interior, empty except for old equipment and rat droppings, and waved the others inside. We rest here 2 hours, he said. Eat, hydrate, treat injuries. Then we move again, but not north. What? Sarah looked confused. The research station is exactly where they expect us to go, so we're going to make them think we're holing up here, scared and defensive. Then we're going to double back, circle around, and approach the station from the west while they're watching this shelter. Jake was already pulling rope and spare clothing from his pack. We build decoys, make it look occupied. Titan and I buy you time. You're gonna fight 8 armed men alone? Sarah's voice carried disbelief and something that might have been respect. I'm going to make 8 armed men think twice about following us in the dark. Jake's ice blue eyes held hers. And I won't be alone. I've got the best operator I've ever worked with right here. He rested his hand on Titan's head. The dog's tail moved once. The only response needed. Outside, hidden in trees 400 yards distant, Dmitry Volkov watched the shelter through a spotting scope and smiled without warmth. Former Russian Spetsnaz, 41 years old. 6'3" and 240 pounds of professional violence. He'd done 3 tours in Chechnya, 2 in Syria, and the last 6 years working for people who paid better than any government. His team of 7 was positioned in a loose perimeter, waiting for orders. The American and his dog had proven more capable than expected, but ultimately it didn't matter. They were trapped, injured, exhausted. By nightfall, this would be over. He raised his radio. All units, hold position. Target is contained. We wait for dark. The 2 hours inside the shelter passed intense preparation. Jake worked with methodical efficiency, stripping spare clothing and packs to create human-shaped forms near the door and single window vent, positioning them to cast shadows that might look like occupants to anyone watching through thermal optics. He explained his plan in whispered detail. Sarah and Tommy would exit through a ventilation shaft on the shelter's north side, invisible to anyone watching the main entrance, then move west through a drainage ravine that would mask their heat signatures and tracks. They'd circle wide, staying low, covering maybe 2 miles before turning north again toward the research station. "And you?" Sarah asked, though her expression said she already knew. "Titan and I are going to have a conversation with our followers. Make them understand that hunting us comes with costs." Jake checked his Glock, chambered a round, returned it to his holster. "We'll catch up to you before you reach the station. If we don't, you keep going. Get those documents to Dr. Voss. Use her satellite communications to reach the FBI field office in Anchorage. Ask for Agent Michael Torres. Tell him Jake Mercer sent you. Tell him it's a broken arrow situation." He pulled a small notebook from his pack, scribbled a number. "That's his direct line. He'll understand." Tommy gripped Jake's sleeve. "You're coming back, right?" Jake knelt, met the boy's eyes. "I've survived worse odds in worse places. But Tommy, if something happens, you take care of Sarah. You're the one who knows this land. You hear me?" The boy nodded, trying to look brave and almost succeeding. Jake squeezed his shoulder once, then moved to the ventilation shaft, a 2-foot square opening designed for air circulation, just large enough for a child and a slender woman to squeeze through. He'd already removed the cover from inside, confirmed it opened onto a slope hidden from the main approaches. "Go now, while there's still some daylight. Stay in the drainage, move quiet. Don't stop until you hit the coordinates I marked." He handed Sarah the map with his route highlighted. 3 hours, maybe 4 with your arm. You've got this." Sarah hesitated, then spoke quietly. "In case we don't see each other again, thank you for not leaving us behind." "Not who I am," Jake said simply. "Now go." He helped boost Tommy up and through, then Sarah, watching their forms disappear down the slope into thick brush. Then he sealed the vent from inside, making it look undisturbed, and turned to Titan. "Just you and me now, brother. Like Helmand, like Kandahar, like every other time they thought 2 operators couldn't change the equation." He checked his gear one final time. Pistol, 2 spare magazines, knife, flashlight, emergency flares. Not much against 8 professionals with automatic weapons, but David had faced Goliath with less. He positioned himself near the door, behind cover that would protect him from initial breach, and waited. Outside, the afternoon light faded toward the early dusk of Arctic winter. Shadows lengthened. Temperature dropped further. And in the surrounding forest, Volkov's team began their approach. Dmitry Volkov moved through snow with the practiced silence of a predator who'd spent decades perfecting his craft. His team spread in a textbook assault formation. 3 men approaching from the south, 2 from the east, 1 holding overwatch position on a ridge with a scoped rifle, and 1 with him as his partner. All wore white winter camouflage, night vision ready for when darkness completed its arrival. Weapons equipped with suppressors to minimize sound. He'd done this kind of operation hundreds of times. Different countries, different targets, same principles. Contain, isolate, eliminate. The American pilot was former military. The file Holloway had pulled said Navy SEAL, but that was years ago. Combat skills degraded without maintenance. The man was protecting civilians, injured and exhausted, trapped in a metal box with 1 exit. This would be over in minutes. Volkov raised his hand, signaling final approach. His team acknowledged, tightening the perimeter. 50 yards from the shelter, 40, 30. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures inside, 2 forms, stationary. Perfect. 20 yards. That's when the door exploded outward. Not literally, no explosive, no blast. But it slammed open with such violence that the nearest assaulter flinched, and in that half-second of surprise, Jake Mercer was moving. He came through the door low and fast, not toward the nearest threat, but toward cover. A fallen log 10 feet away, his body in motion making him a difficult target in fading light. Behind him, a dark shape that resolved into the German Shepherd, moving like a missile toward the eastern flank. Volkov's training took over. Contact. Engage. His weapon came up, but the American was already behind the log, and then muzzle flashes lit the dusk as Jake returned fire. Not spray and pray, but controlled pairs, 2 shots at the nearest man, forcing him to dive for cover. Another 2 at a second position, suppressing. Then chaos. Titan hit the eastern assaulter like a fur-covered battering ram, 95 pounds of trained aggression targeting the man's weapon arm. The mercenary screamed, trying to bring his rifle around, but the dog's jaws clamped on his wrist with bone-crushing force. His partner swung to fire at the animal, but Jake's next shots forced him flat. Fall back, Volkov shouted, furious at himself for underestimating. This wasn't a trapped civilian. This was an operator running a counter-ambush, using their approach against them. Jake didn't give them time to reorganize. He moved again, using terrain and failing light, firing 3 more shots at muzzle flashes, and rolled behind a boulder. Titan, break, here. The dog released the screaming mercenary, whose rifle clattered into snow, and bounded back to Jake's position. In 15 seconds of violence, Jake had wounded 1 man, disarmed another, and forced the entire team into defensive positions. More importantly, he'd achieved his real objective, making them focus entirely on him instead of noticing 2 people slipping away through the drainage to the north. But now came the hard part. 7 armed men, angry and professional, against 1 man and a dog. Volkov's voice carried through the trees, speaking Russian to his team. Jake didn't understand the language, but he understood the tone. They were spreading wider, flanking, preparing to overwhelm his position with coordinated fire. Time to move again. He clicked his tongue twice, a signal Titan knew from hundreds of training sessions. The dog moved first, and Jake followed. Sprinting through the forest using every bit of cover, hearing suppressed weapons coughing behind him, bark exploding from trees as rounds passed close, he returned fire without looking, just enough to make them cautious, then changed direction, forcing them to reorient. A bullet cracked past his ear, too close. Another punched into his pack, the impact staggering him, but the contents stopping penetration. He dove behind an embankment, breathing hard, assessing. His magazine was down to maybe 3 rounds, 1 full mag left plus 1 partial, against 7 men with automatic weapons and night vision coming online as darkness completed its fall. The smart play was to break contact, disappear into the forest, rely on his land navigation skills to lose them, but that would let them regroup, maybe discover Sarah and Tommy's trail. No, he needed to hurt them worse, make them too cautious to pursue effectively. Titan pressed against his leg, panting but uninjured. Jake ran his hand over the dog's head, drew strength from the absolute trust in those amber eyes. 1 more hit, boy, then we run. He pulled an emergency flare from his pocket, the kind that burned at 3,000 degrees. Not a weapon exactly, but everything's a weapon if you're creative enough. He gauged distances, angles, wind direction, then made his throw. The flare arcing through twilight to land directly in the middle of where Volkov's team was advancing. The magnesium ignited in a sphere of blinding white light that turned the forest into noon and destroyed night vision optics instantly. Men shouted, blinded, and Jake used those 3 seconds of chaos to sprint in a direction none of them expected, straight toward their overwatch position. The sniper on the ridge saw him coming but couldn't get a clear shot through trees, and then Jake was at the base of the ridge, climbing fast, Titan scrambling up beside him. The sniper made his choice, abandon the position or fight close quarters. He chose wrong, trying to swing his long rifle around at a target now 10 feet away. Jake closed the distance in 2 strides, knocked the barrel aside, and put the man down with brutal efficiency. 3 seconds, no shots fired. He grabbed the rifle, checked it, suppressed 308 with a good scope and a full magazine. Now the odds were slightly better. Below, Volkov was screaming orders, realizing too late what had happened. His overwatch was compromised, his night vision was ruined, and somewhere in the darkness, a former SEAL now had a precision rifle and high ground. Jake settled into a firing G position, made himself breathe steady despite the adrenaline, and began making the hunters understand exactly what they'd stumbled into. His first shot took out the radio antenna on their command vehicle, visible 200 yards away. His second shattered a spotlight they'd been trying to activate. "You want a war?" Jake said to the darkness and the men who'd chosen to hunt children for money. I'll give you one you'll remember. Then he and Titan were moving again, ghosts in the forest, leaving 7 very angry and suddenly very cautious mercenaries behind them. Jake moved through darkness with Titan at his side, covering ground fast now that he'd broken contact. The rifle gave him reach, the elevation change bought him time, and Volkov's team would be reorganizing, treating their wounded, questioning whether the contract money was worth dying in an Arctic forest. He'd given Sarah and Tommy a head start measured in hours, not minutes. Now he needed to catch up. He navigated by compass and memory, pushing north and west in a wide arc that would bring him to the drainage ravine where the others should be moving. His breath came in controlled measures despite the exertion, years of conditioning making the brutal pace sustainable. Titan ranged ahead, visible only as movement against snow, the dog's white chest patch like a ghost light leading the way. 2 hours of hard travel brought him to the ravine. He found their tracks immediately, 2 sets moving steadily north, spacing between footprints indicating they'd maintained good pace. No signs of pursuit, no indication they'd been discovered. Jake allowed himself 30 seconds of relief before continuing, following their trail now, closing the distance. He caught up to them 3 hours after leaving the shelter. Sarah heard him coming despite his silence, spinning with a rock raised as a weapon before recognition hit. Tommy sagged with visible relief, rushing forward to grab Jake's jacket. "You made it. I told Sarah you'd make it." The boy's voice carried exhaustion, but also something new, belief. Took them down a few notches. They'll be more careful now, which means slower. Jake assessed them both. Sarah's face was drawn with pain, her broken arm cradled tight, but she was still mobile. Tommy showed the effects of prolonged cold exposure, his lips tinged blue despite the layers. "How far have you gotten?" "Maybe 6 miles from the shelter. We've been moving steady, but it's slow going." Sarah gestured at the terrain ahead, where the ravine narrowed into rockier ground. "Tommy says the research station is another 12 miles north, but we'll hit open ground in about 3, which worries me." "Worries me too. Open ground means exposure, and even with the delay I bought us, Volkov won't stay cautious forever. We need to reach the station before dawn, which gives us maybe 8 hours. Jake checked his watch. Just past 8 p.m. Doable if nothing went wrong. "Can you maintain pace?" Sarah nodded, though her eyes told a different story. The broken arm was taking its toll, shock and pain and exhaustion combining. She'd make it because she had to, but she was running on willpower alone now. "Tommy, you're still on point with me." Sarah, center. Titan, rear guard. Jake distributed the last of their food. Made them eat and drink despite protests about rationing. "We're not rationing anymore. We're burning everything to reach the finish line. Let's move." They climbed out of the ravine as the moon broke through clouds, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. The open ground Sarah had worried about stretched before them, rolling tundra with scattered rocks and low vegetation. Nowhere to hide if someone was watching. Jake scanned the horizon, saw nothing, but the exposed feeling never left. They were halfway across, maybe 2 miles of vulnerability behind them, when Titan stopped dead and growled. Not the distant warning growl, the immediate threat growl. Jake's hand went to the rifle, eyes scanning. Then he saw it, lights in the sky, moving fast. Helicopter, coming from the north, searchlight stabbing down at the terrain, flying a search pattern. Down, now. Jake pushed Tommy flat, pulled Sarah down, threw himself over both of them while Titan pressed close. The helicopter passed overhead, searchlight sweeping the ground 200 yards to their west, close enough to hear the rotors, close enough to see the mounted camera gimbal beneath the fuselage. It continued south, toward the shelter area, and Jake realized what had happened. Volkov had called in support. Holloway had resources beyond the ground team, and now they were deploying everything to find 4 people who'd become dangerously inconvenient. "We need to move faster," Jake said. "That bird will be back, and next pass might be right over us. When I say run, you run. Don't look back, don't stop. Just put distance between us and here." They ran, across open tundra and moonlight, 3 humans and a dog sprinting for the cover of forest that seemed impossibly distant. Jake kept waiting for the helicopter to return, for the searchlight to pin them like insects, for the end to come from the sky, but they reached the trees, plunged into shadow and safety, and the rotors remained distant. The forest here was denser, older growth that provided cover but slowed travel. Jake adjusted, Tid their route to balance speed and concealment, always angling north, always closer to the research station and Dr. Elena Voss, who still had no idea death was methodically approaching. They'd covered another 4 miles when they found the snowmobile. It sat abandoned beside a frozen stream, relatively new model, keys still in the ignition. One of Volkov's team, probably, left behind when they'd converged on the shelter. Jake approached carefully, checked for traps or tracking devices, found nothing obvious. "Can you drive one of these?" he asked Tommy. The boy nodded. "Dad taught me. I'm not big enough for a license, but I can handle it." "Good, because we just got a massive advantage." Jake did quick calculations. The station was maybe 8 miles out now. On foot, 3 more hours minimum. On the snowmobile, 40 minutes. "Tommy, you drive. Sarah rides behind you. I'll run alongside with Titan. We make noise, but we make time. And right now, time matters more than stealth." He showed Tommy the controls, made sure the boy could reach everything, then helped Sarah mount behind him. She wrapped her good arm around Tommy's waist, and Jake pulled the starter. The engine caught, shattering the forest silence with mechanical sound that made him wince. "Straight north. Follow the terrain. If you see lights that aren't the station, you stop and kill the engine. Go." He slapped the side. And Tommy throttled forward, wobbly at first, then gaining confidence. Jake ran behind them, Titan matching his pace, the rifle bouncing against his back. The snowmobile moved faster than he could sprint, pulling ahead, but he could follow the track and the sound. This was calculated risk, trading silence for speed, betting that Volkov's team was still south of them, that the helicopter was searching the wrong area, that they could reach Elena Voss before everything converged. 30 minutes of punishing running brought lights into view through the trees. The research station, a cluster of prefabricated buildings with a central structure that looked part laboratory, part fortress. Solar panels and a wind turbine, satellite dish, vehicles and covered parking. And lights in the windows, warm and welcoming and completely unaware. The snowmobile had stopped at the forest edge, Tommy smart enough not to approach until Jake caught up. They regrouped in the shadows, all breathing hard, and Jake studied the station with tactical assessment. Perimeter fence, more decorative than defensive. Main building with multiple entrances. Good sightlines, but also good approaches for anyone trying to breach. We go in quiet, explain the situation, get Dr. Voss to transmit the documents immediately. Then we fortify and wait for federal response. Jake checked his remaining ammunition. 6 rounds in the rifle, maybe 10 in his pistol. Not enough for a sustained fight. Stay behind me, move when I move, stop when I stop. They crossed the open ground to the fence, found the gate unlocked, moved into the compound. Jake approached the main entrance, tried the door, locked, as it should be. He knocked. 3 firm strikes. A voice called from inside, feminine accented. "Who's there? Identify yourself." "Ma'am, my name is Jake Mercer. I'm with 2 civilians and we've got an emergency situation. We need immediate assistance and access to your communications equipment." Silence, then locks clicking. The door opened to reveal a woman in her late 30s, blonde hair in a braid, green eyes sharp with intelligence and immediate concern. Dr. Elena Voss, though Jake didn't know her name yet, wore practical cold-weather indoor clothing and held a satellite phone in one hand. She took in their appearance. The exhaustion, Sarah's splinted arm, Tommy's frostbite, Jake's weapons, Titan's alert posture, and made her decision in seconds. Get inside, quickly. They stumbled into warmth that felt like a physical embrace after days of cold. Elena locked the door behind them, already moving to help Sarah to a chair, her doctor's training. She had a PhD in biology, not medicine, but field researchers learned emergency care, assessing injuries with practiced efficiency. "What happened? Where did you come from?" She stopped, staring at Tommy. "That's the Kavik boy, Tommy. You disappeared 6 months ago. Everyone thought you were dead." "They want me dead," Tommy said. "They want all of us dead, because we know what they did." Jake pulled the waterproof document bag from his pack, set it on the table. "Dr. Voss, my name is Jake Mercer, former Navy SEAL. This is Sarah Chen, journalist from Anchorage. We were in a plane crash 2 days ago, but the crash wasn't an accident. There's a mercenary team hunting us. And you're on their list. We have evidence of a conspiracy involving boreal extraction, murder, fraud, and corruption, going up to state level." Elena's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "Marcus Holloway, the mining permits. I've been blocking them for 2 years because this land is protected habitat. He's tried bribes, threats, legal pressure." Her eyes widened. "He's killing people. 14 murders in 18 months. made to look like accidents. You're number 15. We're numbers 16 through 18. Jake moved to the window, scanned the darkness outside. Nothing yet, but his instincts screamed that time was running out. Out. We need to transmit these documents to the FBI immediately, and we need federal authorities here now. Do you have satellite communications? Yes, but... Elena moved to a computer, started typing. The system's been acting strange the last few days. Interference, like someone's jamming certain frequencies. Jake's stomach dropped. They've been preparing. How long to send the files? If I can get through the jamming. Maybe 20 minutes to upload everything and confirm transmission. Then start now, because they're coming, and when they get here, this turns into a siege. As if summoned by his words, Titan's growl cut through the room. Low, continuous, the sound that meant multiple threats approaching. Jake moved to the window, looked out into moonlit snow, and saw them. Lights, multiple vehicles moving fast from the south. And in the sky behind them, the helicopter, searchlight sweeping, no longer searching, hunting. They're here, Jake said quietly. Everyone away from windows. Elena, how fortified is this building? It's built to survive storms, but not an assault. Then we make it into a fortress. Jake turned to face them, 3 civilians looking at him with fear and desperate hope. Because they're not taking this station, and they're not taking you, not while I'm still breathing. Outside, engines grew louder, and Dmitry Volkov's voice carried through a megaphone, cold and professional. This is your only warning. Send out the American, the dog, and the documents. The rest of you can live. You have 5 minutes to decide. Jake checked his rifle, looked at Titan, then back at the others. 5 minutes. Elena, keep transmitting. Everyone else, help me barricade these doors. We're about to show them what happens when you corner people with nothing left to lose. The 5 minutes passed in controlled chaos. Jake directed the fortification with military precision, pushing heavy lab equipment against the main door, tipping filing cabinets to block the 2 side entrances, while Elena worked frantically at her computer, fingers flying across keys as upload progress bars crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Sarah kept Tommy away from windows, the boy's face pale but determined, and Titan positioned himself at the central point where he could respond to threats from any direction. Transmission is at 40%, Elena called out, not looking away from the screen. The jamming keeps interrupting. I have to reroute through different satellites. It's slowing everything. Keep going. Just keep going. Jake checked sightlines from each window, marking firing positions in his mind. The research station's main building was roughly rectangular, 30 feet by 50, with windows on all sides that were thermal paned for cold resistance, but would stop exactly 0 bullets. The walls were insulated prefab construction, better than nothing but not rated for combat. Still, the building had one advantage. It was designed with a safe room for extreme weather emergencies, a reinforced interior space where Elena could shelter if a storm threatened the main structure. Show me the safe room, Jake said. Elena pointed to a door at the building's center. It's small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, concrete walls, reinforced door, its own air circulation. I use it to store sensitive equipment and samples. That's where you 3 are going when this starts. Tommy, Sarah, Elena, you get in there and you don't come out until I say it's clear, or federal authorities arrive. And you? Elena's green eyes held his. Titan and I are going to have a very pointed conversation with the men outside about property rights and trespassing. Jake tried for a smile, didn't quite make it. I've held worse positions against worse odds. Outside, Volkov's amplified voice cut through the night again. Your 5 minutes are up. We're coming in. Anyone who resists will be killed. This is your last chance to be reasonable. Jake moved to a window, cracked it just enough to shout back. Here's my counteroffer. You leave now. You might make it to a border before the FBI catches up. You stay. I guarantee you'll need medevac helicopters for what's left of your team. You've already lost 2 men. How many more are you willing to sacrifice for Holloway's money? Silence. Then Volkov's response, no longer amplified, but clearly audible in the Arctic stillness. You're 1 man with a rifle and a dog. I have 6 operators and air support. The math doesn't favor you. American. Your math doesn't account for motivation. You're here for a paycheck. I'm here because that's a 12-year-old boy you're trying to murder. Jake's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Come find out which matters more. The response was immediate. Muzzle flashes from the tree line, rounds punching through windows, glass exploding inward in crystalline showers. Jake was already moving, had anticipated the exact moment frustration would override tactics. Pulling back from his position before the first shot, he returned fire through a different window, 3 controlled shots at muzzle flashes, heard a scream that said at least one found its mark. "Safe room, now," he shouted. Sarah pulled Tommy toward the reinforced door while Elena grabbed her laptop, still uploading, the progress bar showing 62%. They disappeared. Appeared inside, and Jake heard the lock engage, solid steel and concrete between them and what was coming. Titan stayed with Jake, moving as his shadow, reading his intentions through years of partnership. When Jake shifted positions, Titan moved to cover his blind side. When Jake reloaded, Titan watched the approaches. They'd done this dance in Afghanistan, in Syria, in places that didn't officially exist on any deployment record. Different enemy, same principles. The mercenaries advanced more carefully now, using suppressing fire and movement tactics. Professional, coordinated, exactly what Jake expected. He counted muzzle flashes, tracked positions, built a mental map of their assault pattern. Volkov was hanging back, directing, smart enough not to lead from the front. 2 men approaching from the east, 2 from the west, 1 providing overwatch, 1 with Volkov coordinating. 6 active threats, just as Volkov had said. The wounded from earlier encounters were either evacuated or too injured to fight. Decent odds, if Jake had infinite ammunition and no need to protect a static position. As it was, he had maybe 30 rounds total, and 3 civilians depending on him not dying. He needed to change their calculus, make them cautious again. Jake waited until the eastern pair reached the fence line, then put a round through the spotlight they'd been using to illuminate the building. Darkness crashed back, and in that moment of confusion he moved to a new position, fired twice more at different angles, creating the impression of multiple defenders. Confusion was force multiplier when you were outnumbered. The helicopter swung around, searchlight stabbing through windows, trying to pin him. Jake dropped flat as the light swept overhead, then came up firing at the aircraft. His rounds sparked off the fuselage, not penetrating but making the pilot reconsider hovering in range. The helicopter pulled back, gained altitude, shifted to an observation role rather than direct support. Small victory, but he'd take it. Transmission at 80%, Elena's voice carried from the safe room, muffled but audible. "Keep going." Jake moved again, years of close-quarters battle experience telling him to never stay static, always make them guess. He fired through the western window, forcing those 2 operators to cover, then swung to engage the eastern approach. Titan growled warning, and Jake spun to see a figure at the back door, trying to breach quietly, while attention was divided. The mercenary got the door partially open before Titan hit him like a missile, 95 pounds of trained aggression targeting the weapon arm. The man screamed, tried to bring his rifle around, but Jake was there, disarming him with brutal efficiency and dropping him with 2 strikes that left him unconscious in the doorway. Titan, guard. The dog stood over the unconscious mercenary, ready to re-engage if needed. Jake grabbed the man's rifle, checked it. AK pattern weapon, full magazine. He now had 2 rifles and slightly better ammunition situation. Still terrible odds, but slightly less terrible. Outside, Volkov was screaming orders in Russian. The assault had stalled. Casualties mounting, the easy contract turning into a nightmare. Jake used the pause to reassess. Maybe 20 rounds in his original rifle, 30 in the AK, 8 or 9 in his pistol. Call it 60 rounds total, against 5 remaining hostiles, plus air support. He needed to break their will, not just their ability to fight. Jake pulled the mercenary's radio from his vest, keyed it. "Volkov, you listening?" Static. Then the Russian's voice, tight with anger. "I'm listening. That's 3 of your men down. How much is Holloway paying you? Enough to die for? Because that's where this is heading. The FBI already has these documents. They're already en route. You complete this contract. You go from hired security to mass murderer with federal agencies hunting you. That's life in Supermax, Dimitri, or a needle. Is that worth the money?" More silence. Jake could almost hear the calculation happening. Mercenary pragmatism versus professional pride and contract obligations. Then Volkov's response, colder than the Arctic night. "You're lying about the FBI. The transmission hasn't completed. We're monitoring it. And when it sails, when we come through those walls, I'm going to make you watch what happens to the others before I kill you." The radio went dead. Jake's chest tightened, but not with fear. With rage. The the cold, focused variety that had made him effective in the teams. These men would hurt Tommy, Sarah, Elena, not for ideology or even survival, but for money, and they thought that made them professionals. Transmission 95%. Elena's shout carried hope and desperation in equal measure. The mercenaries hit all three sides simultaneously. Coordinated assault meant to overwhelm. Jake moved through the building like a ghost, firing from different positions, 3 rounds east, 2 rounds west, moving before return fire could find him. The AK hammered his shoulder, the original rifle providing precision shots when he had clear targets. Titan engaged anyone who got too close, his snarls and the screams of men not expecting canine assault adding to the chaos. A mercenary broke through the western window, and Jake met him with close quarters. Ardor's violence that ended in seconds, another came through the back door, and Titan took him down before he could fully enter. The safe room door held against attempts to breach it, the reinforced construction doing its job. But Jake was running out of ammunition and room to maneuver. His shoulder burned from rifle recoil. His hands were cut from broken glass, exhaustion pulling at muscles pushed beyond normal limits. Titan had blood on his muzzle from bites, moving slower, taking hits Jake hadn't seen in the chaos. Transmission complete. Elena's voice carried triumph. FBI Anchorage received everything. They're confirming. They're scrambling response teams, U.S. Marshals and FBI Tactical, inbound by helicopter from Fairbanks, ETA 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Jake checked his ammunition, maybe 15 rounds left total. Looked at Titan, the dog's amber eyes still alert but showing the strain. Assessed the building. Walls pocked with bullet holes, windows destroyed, 2 unconscious mercenaries zip-tied in corners. 45 minutes against 5 determined killers who now knew federal response was coming and would do anything to eliminate witnesses before extraction became impossible. Jake keyed the captured radio one last time. Volkov, it's over. FBI has everything. They're inbound. You run now, you might disappear before they arrive. You stay, you die here, or spend life in a cell. Your choice. The response was the helicopter swinging back around, door gunner visible now, preparing to strafe the building. Volkov had made his choice. Total commitment. Eliminate all witnesses. Destroy all evidence. Maybe escape in the chaos. Jake grabbed the last item he'd been saving. A flare gun from Elena's emergency supplies. Not rated for anti-aircraft work, but sometimes desperation bred innovation. He moved to the shattered eastern window, tracked the helicopter's approach, waited for the angle. The searchlight pinned him, the door gunner's weapon swinging to target. Jake fired the flare straight into the searchlight housing, the burning magnesium round striking glass and metal, the light exploding in shower of sparks. The pilot jerked away reflexively, and in that moment of distraction, Jake put his last rifle rounds into the helicopter's tail rotor assembly. Metal shrieked, the helicopter shuddered, and the pilot's survival instincts overrode everything else. The aircraft pulled away hard, gaining altitude, turbine making sounds that said something critical had broken. It limped toward the south, trailing smoke, out of the fight. On the ground, Volkov's remaining men stared at the departing helicopter, at the building that should have fallen in minutes but still stood, at the impossible situation they'd been sold as an easy contract. Jake's voice carried through the broken windows, exhausted but unbroken. 43 minutes until federal agents arrive. You've got that long to decide if you want to be here when they show up. Or you can run, maybe get a head start, maybe disappear. But if you're still here when they arrive, you're done. Every murder, every conspiracy charge, all of it. He could see them through the darkness, gathered at the tree line, arguing. One man started moving away, then another. Professional mercenaries doing the calculation. No air support, casualties mounting. Target transmitted evidence to FBI. Federal response imminent. Original employer likely to eliminate them as loose ends anyway. Volkov shouted after them, trying to restore order, but his authority had shattered along with the helicopter. Within 2 minutes, 4 men were retreating into the forest. Engines starting, vehicles departing. Only Volkov remained, standing at the fence line, staring at the building. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the night. No amplification needed. You've made an enemy today, American. I've made a lot of enemies, Jake called back. Most of them are dead. The rest wish they were. Walk away, Dmitri. This is the only chance you get. For a long moment, the Russian stood motionless. Then he turned and walked into the darkness, leaving only tracks in snow and the wreckage of a contract gone catastrophically wrong. Jake waited 10 minutes, watching, before he finally allowed himself to lower the rifle. Titan limped over, and Jake ran gentle hands over his partner, checking injuries, finding mostly bruises and minor lacerations. Nothing that wouldn't heal. He moved to the safe room door, knocked the pattern he'd told them meant safety. It's over. They're gone. Federal response inbound. The door opened, and 3 faces looked up at him. Tommy, Sarah, Elena, carrying expressions that were equal parts relief, disbelief, and something like awe. You held them off, Sarah said, stating the obvious because sometimes the obvious needed stating. 1 man and a dog against a mercenary team and air support. Wasn't just me. Jake looked at Titan. And you 3 gave me reason to hold. That matters more than tactics. He moved to the window, scanning for threats that didn't materialize. Now we wait for the cavalry and hope Holloway doesn't have any more surprises. In a compound 30 miles south, Marcus Holloway stood in his command center and watched his empire collapse in real time. The satellite phone call from the FBI field office supervisor had been professionally courteous and absolutely devastating. Federal warrants being prepared. U.S. Marshals en route for his arrest. Assets being frozen. Conspirators being rounded up simultaneously across 2 states. His carefully constructed network of bribes and murders and forged documents had been dismantled by 1 pilot, 1 dog, 1 journalist, and 1 stubborn scientist who'd refused to be intimidated. Holloway looked at the map showing his mining claims. The geological surveys representing 400 million in rare earth minerals, the future that had been within his grasp hours ago. Then we looked at the private helicopter waiting on his pad, fueled for a flight to Vancouver, where he had accounts and contacts and the beginning of an extraction plan. He made his choice, grabbed the go-bag he'd always kept prepared, and walked toward the helicopter. Some battles were lost, but the war might continue from somewhere without extradition treaties. At the research station, as rotor sounds grew audible from the north, federal helicopters this time, legitimate authority finally arriving, Jake sat against a wall with Titan's head in his lap and felt something he hadn't experienced in 14 months. Peace. Not the isolation he'd sought in Alaska, but actual peace, the kind that came from standing for something that mattered. From protecting people who needed protection, from being the weapon pointed at injustice instead of running from what he was. Tommy sat beside him, silent but present, the boy who'd lost everything and still had the courage to keep fighting. Sarah was already talking to Elena about the story, about testimony, about making sure this time the truth actually reached people who'd listen. And outside, in the Arctic night, federal agents were landing to collect evidence and survivors and begin the process of justice that would send shockwaves through corporate boardrooms and political offices. Jake closed his eyes briefly, let himself feel the exhaustion and pain and satisfaction of a mission completed. Then opened them again, because the fight wasn't quite over yet. Not until statements were given, arrests were made, and Tommy was somewhere safe with people who wouldn't betray him for money. But for this moment, in this place, they'd won. And that was enough. 3 months later, spring was attempting to break winter's grip on Alaska, the Brooks Range showing patches of exposed rock and the first brave flowers emerging from retreating snow. Jake stood on the porch of his cabin, coffee in hand, watching Titan investigate the perimeter with the thoroughness that never diminished regardless of threat level. The morning was quiet, peaceful in the way he'd originally sought when he'd come north. But the peace felt different now, earned rather than hidden in. The FBI investigation had moved with surprising speed once the evidence was in federal hands. Marcus Holloway had made it as far as Vancouver before Canadian authorities detained him on an Interpol warrant. He is currently fighting extradition from a cell while his empire collapsed around him. 14 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, plus fraud, bribery, environmental crimes, and a list of charges that would keep prosecutors busy for years. His arraignment was scheduled for next month, and Jake had already received a subpoena to testify. Dmitry Volkov and 3 of his team had been captured at the Canadian border. The others remained at large. But with federal warrants and Interpol notices, their operational life was effectively over. They'd spend their remaining years looking over shoulders and sleeping in safe houses, if they were lucky. If they weren't, they'd end up in supermax facilities designed for people exactly like them. The corruption network had proven extensive. The sheriff in Coldfoot was arrested, along with 2 FAA inspectors, a state land management official, and 5 corporate executives. Sarah's reporting had won journalism awards and sparked legislative hearings in Juneau about oversight of mineral extraction in protected areas. Her broken arm had healed, and she'd visited twice, each time bringing updates and questions Jake answered patiently because truth mattered, even when it was uncomfortable. Dr. Elena Voss had become something of a celebrity in conservation circles. Her wolf research now protected by federal designation that guaranteed funding and blocked commercial development permanently. She'd sent Jake a letter last month, formal and warm, thanking him for his intervention and inviting him to visit the research station anytime. He hadn't responded yet, but he hadn't thrown the letter away either. Tommy Kavik was the real victory, the one that made the scars and exhaustion and nightmares worth carrying. The boy had been placed with his maternal grandmother in Fairbanks, a woman of strength and warmth, who'd fought the system to get custody and won, with help from pro bono attorneys Sarah had connected her with. Jake had visited once, awkward and uncertain about his role. But Tommy had run to him with the unself-conscious joy of a child who'd learned adults could be trusted again. They'd spent the afternoon talking about nothing important, and Jake had left feeling like maybe he'd done something that mattered beyond the tactical. His satellite phone buzzed, pulling him from reflection. A text message. Sage from Agent Torres, the FBI supervisor who'd coordinated the federal response. Holloway's legal team trying to suppress evidence. Need you in Anchorage next week for deposition. Also, we've got a situation in Juneau that could use your expertise. Interested? Jake stared at the message, feeling the familiar pull. Part of him wanted to ignore it, return to the isolation he'd built so carefully. But another part, the part that had carried Tommy through a storm and held a research station against impossible odds, recognized the opportunity for what it was. Purpose. He typed back, "Send details on Juneau situation, and confirm Tommy's grandmother has full custody before I commit to anything else." The response came quickly. Custody finalized last week. Tommy's safe. Juneau involves indigenous land rights and suspicious accidents. Sound familiar? Jake almost snarled. It did sound familiar, which probably meant someone needed help and the system was moving too slowly to provide it. He looked at Titan, the dog watching him with amber eyes that missed nothing. "What do you think, boy? We up for another round?" Titan's tail moved once, the only answer needed. Before Jake could respond to Torres, another notification came through. This one, an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you." He opened it. Found a message from Elena. "Jake, I know you prefer solitude, and I respect that, but I wanted you to know the station is hosting a gathering next month for everyone involved in the investigation. Tommy will be there, Sarah too, and several of the federal agents who helped. It would mean a lot if you came, not for speeches or recognition, but just so we could say thank you properly. Also, there's someone I'd like you to meet, a veteran who works with retired military working dogs, helping pair them with other vets who need partners. I thought of you and Titan. No pressure, just an invitation. You gave me my life back. Let me at least buy you dinner. Elena." Jake read it twice, feeling something uncomfortable and warm in his chest. Community. Connection. The things he'd been running from because they reminded him of what he'd lost, who he'd lost. But Tommy's resilient courage and Elena's stubborn integrity and Sarah's determined justice had reminded him that isolation wasn't healing, just postponement. He saved the email to respond to later, then replied to Torres, "Send the Juneau details. I'll review and let you know. And Torres, for what it's worth, your team did good work up here. Fast response saved lives." The reply was immediate. "Your work saved lives. We just finished the paperwork. Details incoming." Jake set the phone down, drained his coffee, and looked out at mountains that would always be beautiful and indifferent. The wilderness didn't care about justice, or corruption, or one man's struggle to find peace. But the people living in that wilderness, trying to build lives and protect what mattered, they needed someone to care when the powerful decided laws were suggestions and lives were acceptable losses. He'd spent 14 months trying to forget he was a warrior. 3 days in a storm had reminded him that being a warrior wasn't about war. It was about standing between the innocent and the predatory, about using strength to protect the vulnerable instead of hiding from the responsibility that strength carried. Titan barked once, attention fixed on the access road where a vehicle was approaching, kicking up dust from the drying trail. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. Before he recognized the park ranger truck, it stopped near his cabin and a ranger stepped out, young woman with a professional demeanor and an envelope in her hand. "Mr. Mercer, I've got a delivery from the governor's office. They tried calling but couldn't reach you." Jake accepted the envelope, noting the official seal, and opened it while the ranger waited. Inside was a letter, formal and brief, commending his actions during the boreal extraction investigation and offering a civilian citation for bravery. There was also a card with a personal note from the governor requesting a private meeting to discuss security consulting opportunities for rural communities. He looked up at the ranger, who was watching with barely concealed curiosity. "Tell the governor's office I appreciate the recognition, but I'm not interested in citations or publicity. If they want to help, fund victim support services and strengthen oversight of corporate activity in protected areas." The ranger blinked, surprised by the blunt response, then nodded slowly. "I'll pass that along. For what it's worth, Mr. Mercer, a lot of people up here are grateful for what you did." Tommy Kovik's story got around, reminded folks that sometimes doing the right thing matters more than staying out of trouble. After she left, Jake stood on his porch holding the letter and feeling the weight of choices ahead. He could tear it up, maintain his isolation, continue the life he'd built around avoiding exactly this kind of attention. Or he could accept that some things found you, regardless of how well you hid, and maybe being found wasn't the worst outcome. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from Tommy's grandmother, a woman he'd met once. "Tommy asks about you constantly. He wants to know if Titan is okay. Okay, and if you're eating properly, would you consider visiting again? No pressure, but it would mean the world to him. And honestly, to me too. You gave me back my grandson. That's a debt I can never repay, but I'd like to try." Jake typed slowly, each word considered. "Tell Tommy that Titan is perfect and eating better than I am. I'll visit next month, around the gathering at the research station. Maybe Tommy would like to come to that too?" The response came with the speed of someone who'd been waiting by their phone. "He'd love that. Thank you, Jake, for everything." He set the phone down and looked at Titan, who'd returned from patrol and sat watching him with the patience of a creature who'd learned humans needed time to process what dogs understood instinctively. Loyalty wasn't complicated. Protection wasn't weakness. Purpose wasn't something to run from. "Looks like we're going back into the world, brother," Jake said quietly. "Not full-time, not like before, but enough to make a difference when someone needs it." He ran his hand over Titan's head, felt the solid warmth, the living connection to the best parts of who he used to be. "Think we can handle that?" Titan's tail moved in steady rhythm, and Jake felt the last of his resistance crumble. He'd spent months believing peace meant isolation, that protecting himself meant walls and distance, and careful disconnection. 3 days of storm and violence and desperate protection of people who mattered had taught him different. Peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was knowing what you stood for and who you'd stand with when conflict came. It was being the kind of person children could trust and innocents could depend on and predators learned to fear. He walked back inside, pulled up his laptop, and began drafting responses. To Torres about the Juno situation, conditional acceptance, pending details about who needed help and why. To Elena accepting the invitation and asking about the veteran organization she'd mentioned. To Sarah offering to review her draft article about systemic corruption and corporate crime in resource extraction. As he typed, Titan settled at his feet, and Jake felt something he'd been missing without knowing it. The sense that his life had direction again. That the skills and scars and experiences that haunted him could be tools instead of burdens. The sun climbed higher, warming the cabin, melting the last stubborn ice in shaded corners. Spring was coming to Alaska, bringing renewal and growth and the possibility of beginning again. Not by forgetting what came before, but by carrying it forward with purpose. Jake finished his emails, then stood and moved to the wall where his old team photo hung. The one he'd packed away for months and only recently rehung. 8 men in desert camouflage, young and fierce and certain. 3 of them dead now, their names carved into memorial walls. The others scattered, some thriving, some struggling, all carrying what they'd seen and done. He touched the frame lightly, no longer with grief alone, but with gratitude for what they'd taught him about loyalty and sacrifice, and standing for something bigger than yourself. "I'm done running," he said to the photo, to the memories, to himself. "Not sure what comes next, but I'm done hiding from who I am." Outside, a raven called from the pines, and wind carried the scent of warming earth and new growth. Titan stirred, ready to follow wherever his partner led, because that's what brothers did. They stood together, fought together, survived together. Jake grabbed his jacket, checked his gear out of habit, and headed for the door. He had calls to make, preparations to begin, a gathering to attend where people he'd saved would try to thank him, and he'd try to deflect credit to everyone but himself. It would be uncomfortable and necessary, and maybe, eventually, healing. But first, he and Titan were going to walk the perimeter one more time, checking their territory, ensuring their small corner of wilderness remained safe. Because that's what warriors did, even in peacetime. Especially in peacetime. They protected what mattered. Stood watch over the vulnerable, and reminded predators that some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences. The storm had passed, the battle was won, but the work continued. And Jake Mercer, formerly of the United States Navy SEALs, currently of nowhere in particular and everywhere he was needed, was finally ready to do that work again. Not because he had to, because he chose to. And that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and support this channel. Tell us in the comments what you would have done in Jake's situation, and which character resonated most with you. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to stand up anyway, to protect the innocent, and to believe that one person with conviction can change everything. May you always have the courage to stand for what's right, the strength to protect those who need it, and the wisdom to know that being a warrior isn't about seeking conflict. It's about being ready when conflict finds you. God bless you all, and until the next story, remember, somewhere out there, someone is waiting for a hero. And when duty calls, may we all have the courage to answer.